In 1858, the Illinois Republican State Convention nominated Abraham Lincoln to run for U.S. Senate against one of the most important politicians in the country, Stephen A. Douglas. And in his speech, Lincoln addressed the issue that gripped the country then, which was slavery. The most famous line of the speech was, "A house divided against itself cannot stand." People thought he meant that there would be a civil war, but that's not what he was saying. His message was that the states should not compromise on the issue of slavery, allowing some states to go one way and others a different way, because in the end, this would result in the whole country owning slaves. His message was that the country had to rediscover common values and find common ground to go forward. The line, "A house divided against itself cannot stand," was taken from the Christian Bible, and it resonates for me this week. We are a house divided. We see this in the red and the blues of the maps that so many of us incessantly check this week. The maps are so granular that you can almost feel the tension between neighbors, and it almost feels like with a click of a button, they could enter people's homes and feel the tension. For a country, these last days were exhausting. People felt terror as the numbers shifted. No matter where things stand right at this moment, and I'm not watching TV to know what the numbers are, it's clear that court and other challenges await. For so many, it's been traumatic, and we don't know how this trauma will affect us. The Torah reading for tomorrow morning tells a story about trauma and its aftermath as well. God asks Abraham to sacrifice his son Isaac. Abraham seems to agree. There are moments when you wonder if Abraham really thought that God would ultimately require the sacrifice of his son. Before heading up the mountain, Abraham says to the servants, "Wait at the base of the mountain until I return with Isaac." And the Torah takes pains to say that father and son walked up the mountain together. Vayilchu shnehem yachdav. When I read these words, I can't imagine, and for so many reasons don't want to imagine, that they won't walk down the mountain together in the end. But in fact, they don't. Not because God demands a sacrifice, God's angel stops that. The Torah says that Abraham comes down the mountain to his servants, but there is no mention of his son. Abraham walks alone. After this moment on the mountain, the Torah never describes Isaac and Abraham being together again. Presumably, Abraham died without ever seeing Isaac. Rabbis offer many explanations for this. The Radak says that Abraham is the main character here, and you don't need to mention that Isaac was with him because, of course, he was with him, or he wasn't. But in either case, like, nothing to see here, folks. Move along. But there's two midrashim that offer fanciful but evocative images that are instructive. One from Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer darkly offers that Isaac needed to go to the Garden of Eden to heal from the nick of the knife before the angel stopped everything. And Breshit Rabbah offers a picture of Isaac heading off to study in yeshiva, a house of learning, and says that he wasn't mentioned because he descended on the other side of the mountain. That's the assumption. No matter where you place Isaac after the Akedah, this traumatic event separates father from son. Sarah dies. Abraham sees to her burial alone. Abraham grieves alone. Abraham sets in motion finding a wife for Isaac, but as far as we know, he does not see his son wed. This rupture does not resolve itself until Abraham dies. And that's when Isaac and Ishmael, who have their own story of alienation from one another, come together to bury him. It's as if the Torah is saying houses that were divided could come back together, but it takes time and attention. Like Isaac, after this election, we will need time to heal from our wounds, to emerge from the protective crouch, the anger, the frustration, the pain that so many people in our country have felt for so many years, even before the current administration. That won't be easily forgotten. It's real. The process of coming together, if it can be done, cannot be rushed. Like Isaac, we might need to spend a time in a metaphoric yeshiva, in a house of learning. As a nation, as political parties, and as individuals, there needs to be some deep soul searching. Many people were surprised about how things have played out so far, and there might yet be surprises. What can we learn from all this? During this delicate time, we have to be careful because there really is so much at stake. Let the people in charge of the counting do their jobs. We have a robust system of checks and balances, and that can be used if there is cause. Until the president produces evidence of misconduct, it's irresponsible to call foul. As Republican Governor Doug Ducey of Arizona said, Arizonans turned out in historic numbers for this election, and we owe it to them to count their votes. And that's the same across the country. Baselessly attacking the counting does deep damage to the core of our democracy, the knowledge that my vote counts and your vote counts, that by precious right, we all have a voice. We have to remember to listen to each other's voices, not the voices of the politicians, but the voices of the record numbers of people who express themselves through their vote. Do we understand each other? With whom do we share this country? As we're able, we need to be more curious about the many messages we've all sent to each other about our fears and hopes for this nation. During this time, we would do well to follow the advice that Forward editor Jody Rudoran offered before the election. She wrote, "If your guy wins, don't gloat. Enough name calling, enough demonization of the opposition, enough defining people out of the debate. Gloating is easy, empathy is hard, but empathy is Jewish. Hillel summed up the whole Torah as what is hateful to you, do not do to your neighbor, and empathy is what we need now." She advised readers to consider, what will you say to people who voted for the other guy? Think about it. How we speak about this election matters and will be a factor in how long of a shadow it casts. The no gloating rule, I don't think, precludes vigorously pursuing one's agenda. Can we get back to, or more likely, invent a new way of governing that will feel respectful, even when it's raucous? Can we maintain a culture of debate and peaceful protest as methods by which we discover new truths? I don't imagine a kumbaya moment coming anytime soon, but in order to move forward, our leaders and we need to consider, what are the areas of legitimate disagreement, and where, when we brush past posturing and rhetoric, can we agree? We need to leave behind the schoolyard he started a line of argument, and while holding firm to values, morals, and ethics, we need to find that common ground. Maybe not the common ground we once imagined we had, but issues and values and programs where we can all agree so that we can move forward during this incredibly challenging time. We could be not a divided house, but one reunited. We need to remember that our kids are watching. They're watching this all. What do we want them to take away from all this? How can they have a firm grounding in who they are as Jews and Americans, fight for what they believe, and see the humanity of every person in this nation? Someone told me about an article about space travel and the utopian ideas that people have about colonizing another planet. And they imagine, if we go someplace else and start from scratch, we can start societies that are ecologically aware and financially prosperous and places of equality. They imagine Shangri-La. But the author cautioned, and I couldn't find the article, the problem with these visions is that no matter where we go, we will have to take us with us. There's no getting away from us. As a nation, we have to take us with us, all of the red and all of the blue and all of the people who feel that neither color really suits them. Coming down the mountain alone will cost too much. No matter who sits in the White House in January, our country will grapple with the legacy of these years for some time. The reality of 1858 is not ours. Our republic is wounded, but I do not think it's beyond repair. We have work to do. These days of anxiety will end, and when they do, we would do well to commit ourselves to the ideals and free institutions which are the pride and glory of our country. We haven't always lived up to these ideals, and our institutions have at times needed thoughtful repair, but writ large, these commitments have enabled us to reach great heights. There's a glimmer of hope in the story of the relationship between Abraham and Isaac. Despite the distance between them, Abraham cares that Isaac will not be alone and sends his servant to find a wife for Isaac. Well, it doesn't seem to have changed the trajectory of their interaction. Perhaps they both still understood that they were bound together, and maybe that's what enabled Isaac to come together and meet Ishmael again after Abraham dies. It's a half consolation, perhaps, but these gestures and more are what will be needed if we can ever come together. And I look forward to the day when Vayilchu Shnehem Yachdav, we can and will walk together. Wishing everybody a Shabbat Shalom.
Yasher Koach, Rabbi.